And so there were kata, or techniques that weren't taught, to a more general, more general curriculum. Sensei Oda combined them all into Okinawa Kenpo Karate and Kabuto. So remember this, when we can talk about kata, and that is, we have a different view. Okinawan Kenpo has a different view of kata than the other Okinawan styles. And we can speculate about why the other ones have a different view. It would purely be speculation, so I'm not going to even go down that path. But what you need to keep in mind is that, I don't know about the other systems, but Okinawan Kenpo has a fighting system that dates back to the 7th century. And so it is multifaceted, and it is detailed, and it is in-depth. It was never taught, it was taught to only one person in a generation. Mr. Nakamura passed it on to Sensei Oda. Sensei Oda was then supposed to pass it on to Mr. Nakamura's son. And so there are lots of senior Okinawan Kenpo in, sensei under Mr. Nakamura who didn't really learn the complete fighting system. And so Sensei Oda then taught Sensei Flores, because Sensei Flores, who was my instructor, did Flores. He was Sensei Oda's most senior American student. And most of Sensei Oda's students were American because of the Marines and the Vietnam War, and I'll go into more detail later on. I don't want to bog everybody down. And so the fighting system existed. It was just never taught. And so Sensei Flores taught me, but only after, about 10 years or so of actually doing the traditional type training. And I talk about this in my book that you probably have a copy of. And so knowing how the system works gives you a better understanding of what the kata is. Kata is, under the Okinawan Kenpo system, is a physical textbook. And so many other styles of Okinawan karate do kata, and I can only assume that many of them were not taught their particular system of fighting. They were taught the basics, and they were taught the kata and the movements in the kata, but they weren't taught a system of fighting, a comprehensive system of fighting. And so our comprehensive system of fighting, deals with everything that's involved in physical combat. Mr. Nakamura was only concerned with the fighting aspect of Okinawan Kenpo. He wasn't one of these masters who believed it was a spiritual perfection thing, and developed a character. It was all about combat, because he was born and raised in an era where karate was only combat, and he never lost that perspective and emphasis. So he fought bare-knuckled, as the masters did before him. In early 1920s, the Japanese banned bare-knuckle fighting. Before it was to the knockout, the maim, or the death. And they banned that, and Mr. Nakamura was very disturbed by that, because to him, karate was fighting. That's what it was. In fact, he made a public statement saying, if there is no fighting, there is no karate. He also went on to say that if there is no jeopardy, in other words, if you can't test your techniques physically in real combat, then he said what will happen is effective techniques will be replaced with ineffective techniques. In other words, there'll be theory, there will be no proof. And so, because they couldn't fight bare-knuckled any longer, he developed the Bogo armor, which was a kendo mask and a body protector and gloves. And in Okinawan Kenpo, that's what separates us from most all the other Okinawan styles now. So we fight full contact, everything's legal, ear slaps, eye gouge, head butts, knee strikes. You can strike hard as you can anywhere there's padding, but you have to strike the padding. Now, there are those who argue, and I've heard this argument before, that it's not real fighting. Well, if you've never been in a real fight, not a school ground scuffle or not a high school slugfest, but if you've actually ever been in a real knockdown, drag out, almost get your butt killed fight, then you really can't evaluate whether Bogo armor and Bogo Kumite is actual fighting. I was a police officer for 20 years. The last 35 years I've taught police officers defensive tactics, use of force, officer survival. So yes, I've been in real fights. And I'm here to tell you, I had never had a real fight as a karate instructor, as a civilian karate instructor. It wasn't until I went to work as a police officer that I actually got into real fights. And I'm here to tell you that Bobo Kumite, when it's done properly, is as close to real fighting as you'll ever get and not go to jail. Also prepared me for fighting with people on the street. So I can tell you firsthand from my own experience that the Okinawa Kenpo system of fighting and the way we train, it dovetails very well with actual combat in a real life and death situation. So that's my perspective. When you, in my classes that you are taking, my perspective is identical to Sensei Nakamura's. It's all about combat. It's not about sport. It's not about personal development. It's about combat. And that's what I loved about the Bobo gear, and that's what I love about Okinawa Kenpo. So our system of fighting encompasses all that fighting entails: distance, defensive movement, application, the individual techniques, but not only just individual techniques, but how they are applied. Because we have our stances and our movement, or if you have to know the movement, the defensive movement, the offensive movement, what techniques are applied at what distance. All this is part of the fighting system that I'm going to teach you. And so I'm going to teach you the fighting system. Kata is part of that fighting system, but it is the textbook. And that's the important thing to remember. Kata is a physical textbook. That's all it is to me. That's all it was to Mr. Nakamura. Mr. Nakamura was concerned with fighting. He thought Kata had value because it was a physical textbook. Now, I will tell you that I don't believe that all you have to do is kata to become an effective fighter. Don't believe it. Mr. Nakamura didn't believe it either. That's why he developed the Bobo arm, and that's why he did drills and exercises and broke the system down into fighting. He just didn't tell all but a few students exactly where the fighting system was indicated in the kata. Because the whole idea, of course, was only a few got that knowledge. And so when you're doing your kata, if you don't know the fighting system, it has no meaning to you. Now, Mr. Nakamura didn't use the term bonkai, neither did Sensei Odo, neither did Sensei Flores, neither do I. Bonkai, on the other karate systems, means to analyze. And so what they do is they look at the movements in the kata, and they come up with applications on their own. Okay, Mr. Nakamura didn't believe in that, and the reason why was because, if you make up your own applications, but you never get to use them, how do you know they're actually really effective applications? You didn't. And so he developed a Bobo armor for that. And so if he wasn't going to give you, as a student, the system of fighting, he was going to give you an exercise that allowed you to experiment and learn on your own through trial and error about what techniques were effective for you and what techniques weren't. And so we don't use the term bonkai, we use the term tori. Tori means bird. And the concept behind this is this. As the bird flies, you only see him flap their wings. However, what's actually happening when a bird flies is a multitude of things. He's breathing, his heart is pumping, he's looking for predators and food, he's looking for a place to land. There are lots of things that are happening that you don't see. You only see that the wings flap. Well, that's what you have with kata. If you don't understand the fighting system, if you don't know the fighting system, and if I don't tell you each move in this kata is a cue for an element in our fighting system, you'd never know. And so it was explained to me as hidden moves. Tori means hidden moves. Moves hidden within the kata, that's true, but it doesn't really adequately define what it is. What happened was, with the kata, when Mr. Nakamura integrated the pin-ons, and then when the other masters integrated the other kata that we do, and everybody else seems to do, is each movement in kata is misaligned and misgrouped and miscombined. So if you try to execute the movements in the kata exactly how they are practiced, they won't work, because you're not supposed to know. You're supposed to have a knowledge of the system and then say, well, this block is here, and what are you doing in the system? What does it represent in the system? What does this movement with your leg represent in the system? If you don't have knowledge of the system, you would never make that connection. I don't believe in the 21st century not teaching you the fighting system is the right thing to do. I don't. Because what happens, if I don't teach you, then you'll make it up on your own, and pretty soon it will stop being Okinawan Kenpo. It'll turn into some kind of weird mutation that won't work. Unless you find the Boba Bear, because that'll tell you what works and what doesn't work really quickly. But you still won't learn, a 600-year-old fighting system. So the way I'm going to offer you this instruction is I'm going to teach you the system of fighting, and then the first 3 kata, I will explain to you where the system is identified by the cues and the kata. And after that, I'm going to teach you the system, and then as you evolve, and if you stay long enough practicing Okinawan Kenpo underneath me, then you'll learn exactly where all the techniques in our system are cued in all the kata that we do. Now, to go back to the number of kata, originally there was 7, then there was 12, and Sensei Odo then was told by Sensei Nakamura to incorporate all the existing kata that was being lost and the Kabuto kata into our system, which makes it 44. That is way too many kata. That is way too many kata to learn in a short period of time. Now, if you like to do kata, and you want to learn, as many kata as you can, and you want to go study kata from someplace else, that's all fine and dandy. See, because when Mr. Nakamura integrated those kata into our system, he did it using the Okinawan Kenpo fighting techniques. So, if you want to integrate some other kata from another Okinawan style into what you do, that's fine. But but you need to adapt the kata into our system. In other words, the stances need to be Okinawan Kenpo, the blocks need to be Okinawan Kenpo, the punches need to be Okinawan Kenpo, the movement needs to be Okinawan Kenpo. Because if you're not, you're just doing a bad impersonation of Shorin-ryu or Guji-ryu or Witsi-ryu or who knows what, Shotokan. You're just mimicking. You just as well learn to dance, because that's all the better it's going to be. And so, remember that, Mr. Nakamura, Sensei Odo really liked to do kata. He really did. He was really good at it, and that's why Mr. Nakamura asked him to do all the integration as opposed to the other senior students, because I think he really did have a great love for doing kata. And so Sensei Nakamura knew that Odo would be the guy to put them all into that big resource pool. But that's all been changed. Now, you'll learn all 44 kata eventually, but it will be spread out over a long period of time, not a year, 2 years, or 3 years. Because it's better to learn the kata and the cues and the fighting system and have a very good understanding of it as opposed to a whole general understanding of a lot of stuff. So our kata is used as a textbook. And so needless to say, we need to perform our kata like a textbook. Now the other systems, they do their kata differently in the sense of the way it's performed. If you watch them on YouTube, and you'll see lots of good kata being performed on YouTube, but the way the Shorin-ryu people do it, the Guji people do it, different. The Witsi-ryu people, different. Of course, the Japanese do it a lot different. And so, but you'll see them do it, some of them do it really fast. I mean, they'll run through this whole kata really quickly. And it looks impressive, and it's a good demonstration. But it's not, they're not using it like a text.